Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Megan Norris. We will get straight on into it. So, to start with, you have done so much in your literary history. And I think that a lot of people will be really fascinated with the work you've done through promotions. So, with your history of being associated with the news, and then you've got your Sisters in Crime Association as well. I find that incredibly fascinating. So I hope all the other mystery authors and crime writers out there also find this incredibly fascinating, and I'm sure they will. So tell us a bit about your journey going from not being an author to being an author.
Well, I started off in news. I started off in the 70s in a newsroom in the UK as a young reporter. And those were in the days where there were very few women in news. You know,
Mm.
there were women in news, but they had to work really very hard to get where they were. There was one woman, but I never worked with her. She was on the main paper, a big head office paper, and she did women's type issue type stuff. And I didn't want to do that. I
Mm.
wanted to do true crime. I wanted to cover courts I wanted to follow police around in a dirty old coat taking notes. And I'd seen it on the telly and I wanted to do that from the time I was a little girl. So I remember watching a TV show called Dixon of Dock Green, which was about a copper on the beat in England. It was a very well known show. And he used to have a journalist trailing around taking notes in a trilby with a cigarette on his lip. And I wanted to be that person. So I
Oh.
always wanted to do it, and I ended up on a newspaper where I quickly graduated from the newsroom to covering courts. So I went from covering general news, and even then I was sort of hanging out with police, going to down to the police station every day, finding out what they were doing. In the days before mobile phones or laptops or iPads, I used to have to do the hard yards and go there in person
Oh.
and
See,
front up at the desk.
there's stuff in person that you just don't get when you look at things online. Like you can look at, and I think this is part of the reason where we get so many different types of stories coming through. Because I love true crime, but when you look at it and you go through true crime, so just say you wanted to see a place in Logan or you wanted to go on a crime tour, you see so much more about the space when you're physically present.
Totally.
Having the courage to go to that location gives you so much more information than just reading the notes of what occurred or the notes of what was
Totally.
found.
I think that's the difference. When in the old days before we had mobile phones and laptop computers, we had to physically be there. And
Mm.
I look back and I don't know how we did it because, you'd hear about something, word of mouth, and you'd have to get in the car and drive there and be there and get on everybody's nerves asking questions. And then I remember writing once a story on the back of fish and chip shop paper in the back of a car while the photographer drove like a crazy man back to the office because I was writing it in shorthand on the back of fish and chip paper. And then I got back to the office and quickly typed it.
Yeah.
And then it had to be somehow transmitted. I don't even remember how we did it. I don't remember how we did it, but it had to be transmitted to head office to go to the
Ah.
printers right away. So when they invented, I had one of the first laptops because I covered court. I graduated to covering court. And the very first day I went to court, I remember sitting on the press bench, and it was like I found my place in that moment.
Oh, wow.
I sat on the press bench, and there were police everywhere, and detectives, and prison officers, and criminals. And I sat on the press bench, and it was like, yes, this place has been waiting for me.
Yeah.
This is where I belong. So I covered all the court cases, but the first laptop, because I wasn't in the office, and in the old days, I used to not have time to write my story. I worked for an evening paper, and we'd have to do several editions by 2 o'clock from
Mm.
10 till 2. I'd have to run out and update it. It meant running out to the press room, ringing the old phone on the wall, ringing the head office where a girl with headphones and a typewriter, I would talk my story down the phone and she would tap it in
Oh
and then
my
it would run
gosh.
down to the printers. And I didn't have time to write it. So you get used to writing short, sharp, fast.
Mm.
And then I'd go back in court and pick it up and do the next installment. What are they saying now? And we used to work two together. So I'd run out and read the start of the story while my colleague covered, and then we'd swap.
Oh,
And
wow.
he would run out and he would say, "What was your last sentence?" And I would tell him, and he would go and pick the story up, and the girl would carry on typing.
Oh, there's such crazy synergy there. That's
Yes,
amazing.
it was fast. It was quite stressful when I look back, but we loved it. And then I was given this thing like a suitcase. It was like a great big heavy suitcase that broke your back to drag around. And that was the early laptop. And it was like a
Oh,
portable typewriter, and it had two rubber cups on the back of it for the old phone receiver, you know, the old telephone receiver.
mm-hmm.
And I used to type on this machine and ram the telephone receiver in and press in a number, and it was like magic. And I'd sit back, and the story would somehow get out of my suitcase computer into the system in head office
Oh my goodness. It's like
in the
early
old
days internet.
Yes, so I was like Wilma Flintstone.
Oh, wow. But honestly, those sorts that history is so it's got so much more impact. To know that it's because of people like you and because of contraptions like the old laptop, I get to film this on a
Yes,
laptop with a
true.
separate webcam, and I've got two other screens attached to it. And the prettiest part of all of this is that my keyboard is bright pink. Um, so
Oh, I want it. I
uh,
want one.
it's not just bright pink, but it also changes color.
Oh, I
So
want that keyboard.
it's a good
I
little
won't
one.
show you mine because I've actually worn the keys off. And I'm looking at it now, and I've got holes everywhere with screws sticking out. And I'm typing on screws at the moment because I haven't had time to buy a
Oh
new one. And
wow!
my son said the other day, "Where's the F key gone? Where's the T key gone? Where's it gone?" And I thought, I don't know. It's worn off on my fingers. It's gone. This is
I
the third keyboard I've worn out in 18 months.
I have worn out my A key, and you can see by like the shine on the letters which ones I use the most.
Oh well,
Um,
mine are just screws. I'm looking at screws, dirty screws actually. Oh,
oh well, I hope that someone brings you a keyboard when we get to the
me
Writers'
too.
Festival. Oh, someone please bring Megan a keyboard. She's in desperate need of one. Bring her a titanium one so it doesn't wear out.
Yes, please.
Oh, that's magic. But it's because of these things, and I think that by acknowledging this history, and I think this is one of the things that books and film are able to help us with a lot, is they recycle these stories, and you can see the time period. But for someone to write a new story in that time period means that we get to understand the steps that took us from not having anything to now.
Yes,
Which
that's true.
it's a phenomenal history is incredible, and to understand it and to know it means that we're not doomed to repeat it. Um, but tell us a bit about the crime books that you have written, because you aren't a fiction mystery writer. You take true crime and then turn it into something greater.
No, no, I'm
No?
not fiction. I don't. I wouldn't boast enough. Claim that I can write fiction. I don't write fiction. I write the truth. I still do. So it's an evolution of what I was trained to do, which
Mm,
means I write true crime
beautiful.
rather than fictional crime. So all my stories are grim and true and awful and
Yeah.
sad and tragic because they're true. And I think that's the difference. Recently, Lorraine Peck, who's my friend, who's a wonderful new fictional author, she won the Ned Kelly with her debut book,
Oh
The Prodigal
wow.
Son. She's just got a new book out, but she came up to help me launch Out of the Ashes. And so I had to send her a copy of the manuscript to read. Out of the Ashes is a story. I see it as an amazing inspirational story. But then I'm used to writing people who are dead. You know, I write you're dead to be in my books. And this amazing woman survived the Bali bombings. She's the most
Oh wow.
burned survivor to ever survive a tragedy that I've ever covered. And I lived in a high bushfire area, so I've done lots of burn victims.
Yeah.
But never have I seen anyone blown up by a terrorist bomb. And
Mm.
she was the most injured woman. I met her 20 years ago on Mother's Day when I went to do a story for a magazine. And I followed her for a long, long time, just calling in to see how she was faring. And then she rang me last year asking me to write a book. And I had 6 months to do it in because it needed to be on the shelf in time for the 20th anniversary of the Bali bombings.
Yeah.
So I had to research and write, research and write. Luckily for Therese Fox, who's the lady in the book, I had interviewed her so many times over many years, I keep every notebook. So I could revisit some of those interviews of some of that material. But when you're writing the truth, I sent it to Lorraine to read the manuscript, and she rang me in tears. Like she rang me, and I thought, oh no, I've
What have
made
you
this so
done?
tragic and heartbreaking. People are going, oh, I can't read it. But she rang me and she said, oh my God, I'm on chapter 3. It's just heart wrenching. I've had to put it down. And I thought, oh no. And I said, just keep going. Like she survived, remember?
Yeah,
She
yeah. This
survived
is
this
a this is
terrible
you
loss.
know what the ending is, and it's okay.
And she said, but it's so raw and harrowing. I don't know how you did it. And I said, because I know she survived. Isn't it? For me, it's a story of inspiration and how
Mm,
she came from that place to be where she is today. And Lorraine said, I think that's the difference between me writing these thrilling murder mysteries with twists and stings in the tail and surprises, and I can kill people off or not, or they can turn out to be heroes or villains or not.
it
But you're
really is
right,
in perspective.
you're writing the graphic, awful, raw truth, and
Mm,
it's really confronting. And
mm,
I said, yes, I suppose because everything I do is confronting, it's supposed to be. Because the whole message of the books that I write is let's learn lessons, everybody. What
mm.
what did we get wrong with? Because a lot of victims feel forgotten, and so when you're covering court as a news journalist, as I covered court for years, the story is about the offender in the dock.
Yes.
That is the story of the crime. It is what this person is alleged to have done, whether he did it, what the evidence says, did he do it, didn't he do it, and you listen to all the witnesses. It's the hard, cold fact
Yeah.
of the crime, and then there's the verdict. When you're writing those stories, the victims often feel very invisible
Yes.
because if the victim, say, is a domestic violence victim and is dead, there is no voice for that person in court. That person's dead, and it's not about that person. It's about the criminal and is he getting a fair trial? And people get really upset. It becomes all about the offender.
Yeah.
So for me, I've become a voice for people who don't have one,
Yeah.
or whose voice was never heard. They become the deceased, or they're the family of the deceased. And
Mm.
so I give those people a voice. Was it like for them living through that time? And what is it like for them years later, living with the legacy of that dreadful crime? And have I done the story justice?
Yeah.
So, moving from news where I've got half an hour less, 10 minutes, write that story, 500 words, do it right now.
Mm.
I've gone from that to the first book I wrote. I remember sitting at the computer thinking, oh no, I'd never had that experience. I've got endless time. Well, in my mind, I had endless time and endless empty pages to fill. And I panicked and I thought, oh, what am I going to say? How do I even begin? With news, you haven't got time to think about it.
No, you
You
just
just
say it and it's
tell the
out.
story. Tell the story, tell it quick, do it right, make sure it's true. With a book, it's like make sure it's true, but where do you begin? And how do you build suspense in every chapter in a story that's been before the courts? Because
Yeah.
most of the stuff I do is very high profile. So you've already seen it on telly, read it in all the papers, and you think you know it all.
Yeah.
People do. They said, oh, I know that, seen it on Netflix, seen it on the news, seen it on 60 Minutes, read it in the press. What is there to tell?
Oh,
And so my trick is how do you build suspense and keep the reader turning that page in a story that they think they know? So you have to pull rabbits out of a hat,
oh, I
find things
like that.
that know. Yes,
And that often comes down to perspective, because certain things don't look the same when you have that deeper perspective. Um, so you can take it through so many different lenses, which gives you different insight into the entire
yes,
thing.
yes. And I think that having been a journalist has been beneficial. A lot of people don't like us. I think we're sort of up there with parking wardens and the taxman in terms of popularity. And even now, I keep seeing it's a general tag, the media. It's like this
Mm,
horrible disease that you've got. You're one of the paparazzi, and I was one of the paparazzi. I've done some terrible gutter journalism in my day, stalking Cameron Diaz and Justin Timberlake around Crown Casino, getting thrown out of hotels, stalking celebrities who were cheating. I've done it. The master chef that was wanted his dessert and eat it. He was a love rat. You name it. I've done it. So I sort of
oh,
own that.
scandal,
I sort
scandal.
I can take that insult on the chin. But when I'm writing books, it's coming useful because one thing I learned from news, if you went to the scene of a terrible event like Port Arthur
Mm,
and you ask people what happened, some people will say, oh, I saw this and I saw a man and I saw flames and I saw people with blood. They will tell you what they saw. Someone else will say, oh, I heard an explosion. I heard screaming. I heard this commotion. They heard it. Someone else
mm,
will say, I felt, I heard a scream and I felt sick. And they tell you how they felt. And I think the trick I've learned, because I could interview five people about the same incident and they will all tell it me differently. And they
mm,
all remember it differently. Audio, visual, feeling. I've learned with a book, especially with true crime, is to get everyone to talk about the same thing and tease out of them a bigger picture, a different picture. Because put all that together, you've got a completely different perspective on what happened, and you've got everyone's. So in the Bali bombings, when Therese was blown up by the bomb walking into the bar to have a photo, she just walked. They just happened on their last night to walk into the bar, and she went to the bar to get a drink, and the suicide bomber walked in behind her.
oh my God.
And so, when she crawled, so I talked to everyone who was there. What did you see? What did she look like? I asked her, but she was too ill to really remember.
Yeah.
So her memory is very foggy. It's almost dreamlike. And so I wrote at the start of that book a dream sequence over one page. It's like 8 paragraphs, this dream sequence. And then she wakes up in hospital. Was it a dream? She doesn't know. How
Yeah.
did I get here? What's happening? And then out of the light, out of the darkness comes a woman in white who says, you're okay now, you're in hospital. You're
Oh,
safe. It's like a dream. So I wrote
wow.
it like a dream because for her it was like a dream. But then I got all the other people, the man who found her dying in the doorway, the teachers that helped her at the hotel, and I got all their descriptions and put them all together. And that wove into 2 or 3 chapters till their paths cross.
Yeah.
And all the paths of all these different people cross in chapter 5.
Yeah.
So it's like weaving a story through
Yeah.
everybody else's lens, exactly as you said. So I actually think, whilst everybody hates media, and we're treated like the Cinderella, we are though. And in writing terms, author terms, we're not real authors, we're media journalists. But someone said in one of the reviews, because I've got a few trolls, oh, she writes like a journalist, typical journalist. And I thought, yes, it's true, it's fair, and it's accurate. I'm
Yeah.
not embroidering it. This is the cold hard truth. This is what happened.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. When I was at school and I wanted to pursue being an author, I was discouraged from it, and they said you should go be a journalist first. And I couldn't see the clear pathway between being a journalist and being an author. They were both
No,
writing, but one didn't equal books. One equaled, exactly what you've been describing, racing around after a story and then writing it in such a succinct way that it'll fit onto a thinly printed newspaper page. And so for me, I didn't see the correlation, but having to have written articles through the chamber and for different bits and pieces,
yes, yes.
it teaches you so much more about what you're writing. You have to, you add your flourishes in, but they can't take up room. So you learn to weave your story with such a tighter tapestry. And it speaks volumes when you're able to do that, when you're able to exercise those skills.
It was quite hard to transition from writing news to writing books, though, because you've got all this room, and you have
Mm.
got no one saying no. You've only got 500 words. You've got
Oh,
no one saying
it's a
that to
weird
you.
feeling. It's a weird feeling.
Yeah. So I'd got all this space and time, and I was panicking. I didn't know what to do with it. But once I got into that first chapter, I did, and I let the story tell itself. So I've spoken with a number of authors at Genre Con, Queensland Writers Genre Con,
Yes, oh, I
and
love genre con. It's fantastic.
well, I was on a crime panel with Jess Forsyth off the Case File podcast. So Jess
Oh,
scripts. So Jess scripts, which I find fascinating. I sort of script. I guess I sort of script because I'm telling someone else's story and I'm telling everybody's story, really. And these other guys, I had Rob Williamson and Benjamin Stevenson, and they'd written fiction, beautiful fiction, thrillers. And so we were talking about, do you plot a storyline? Do you, I'm a pantser.
Yeah.
I fly by the seat of my pants because that's how I've been trained. You don't have time to sit down working out timelines and doing like a storyboard on the wall. I never have time for that. I've got it all in here. And my rule to everybody actually, but this is how I work, is just tell that story. Just keep telling it, tell it, tell it. You can't edit something if it's not down there. So it
Mm.
doesn't matter what it
Hmm.
looks like when you finish, just tell the whole story and then start tidying it up, working on it, improving it, adding to it, making it more colorful, chucking stuff out, delete, delete.
Yeah.
Uh, you can't edit or improve something you haven't written yet. So you have to get the story down. And I think people spend way too much time with all these stupid techniques. So probably I'm in the minority because I'm a journo, but I was reading the other day about this new technique, and I found it fascinating. It's where you go to a little writers group on a Friday or something, and you write for 10 minutes, and then you get up and wander around. Then you come back, and you write for another 15 minutes, and you get up and wander around. I'd kill anyone that did that to me. If anyone came in here in the middle of my writing to make me do that, I would kill them, because I'm at that deep place where if I'm dragged away even for a cup of coffee or to take a phone call, it takes me a whole hour to get back to the line I was on when I got interrupted. So I don't know
Yes.
how anyone gets anything done doing that rubbish. And sorry, whoever invented it probably thinks I'm dreadful because all the writers' groups advocate it. But I think, what a load of rubbish. Like, how does anyone get anything done? My bent is, if you've got a story to tell, sit down and tell it
Mm.
and then
I,
figure it out after.
it makes me wonder if these people are getting in their own heads and in their own way. Because when I'm doing emails and menial things, when I have to do, stuff that feels draining, then I think they may have been using the Pomodoro technique where it's 25 minutes
Oh,
on,
that's
where
it.
you're working
Pomodoro.
full time, and then you've got 5 minutes where you stop, you walk away from it, and you have a break. Now, I find that works really well when you're doing boring things that you don't want to be doing.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
a great way to be like, okay, I'm plowing through this, 5 minutes off. Now, okay, now back to it. And it feels better. It feels refreshing. But when you are in flow, um, it's such a deeper state of being, and you don't want to crack that. You don't want to break that.
No.
I've had cats crawl across the keyboard, and I've just shoved the cat off and keep going. I've had dogs barking for half an hour straight at me, and you can't stop. Like, if you stop, the thread is lost. And sometimes when you're in a really stressed state, and when it's taken so long to get into that state to begin with, you don't know when it's going to come back. You don't know if you
Exactly.
got the stars
It,
aligned to get it to roll back
absolutely.
in.
And
Yeah.
I just cannot imagine, and no one would dare come in here and drag me out. No one, because I'm right in
Uh,
my place. Like, seriously, do not disturb me. And it's the same with, I start very. People have different ways of different levels of energy. Some people I don't know how they do it. They start working about 4 in the afternoon and they work at night. That would do my head in. I start at 4 a.m., 5 a.m.
oh,
I'm like
Jesus.
I'm like the Foxtel bunny. I get up and I'm like, bing, where's the laptop? And I creep off and I work off the ironing board and I'm there typing away before everyone else begins. I've done so much work by midday. By 3, I'm doing pitching, admin, I'm pitching things. So, I've done everything. Like, I've written jingles for Telstra. At
Yeah.
one stage, I had a job turning 60-page, boring engineering briefs into 250 word sparkling slogans and jingles. So I did that. And I wrote
Uh,
speeches for the Minister for Small Business and the Minister for Rural Industry. I wrote government speeches. And then I did all the publicity for Pink. So I did once
wow.
I was asked by Red Bull. They launched a racing car team into the Melbourne Formula One Grand Prix, and they wanted a newshound to belt out media releases at 2 in the morning to the international press. And so they put me behind Pink. They had a curtain, a black curtain, and I was behind the curtain on a high bar stool with like a sort of ironing board trestle table. And I was writing my media releases with headphones on while that band blasted out her latest hits. I
Oh,
think she did
amazing.
6 songs, but I wasn't hearing the music. I was at the biggest party Australia had ever seen because They launched the racing car with Razzmatazz, and they wanted me to do all the media releases, the guest star at the biggest party Australia's ever had. And so I was there tapping out media releases about, why she was there and all of this to the international press at 2 a.m. with a band rattling in the background, and never gave it a thought. It didn't disturb my train of thought. It didn't distract
No,
me because I was in my happy place. But if anyone had come over and given me a drink or tapped me, I would have had to start all over again.
I can handle a small level of interruption. Normally I will put a string across my door that says that I'm possessed by the writing demons, and unless you're willing to perform an exorcism, don't interrupt me. So I'll do that. But my partner will sneak in and just without me even realizing, put a cup of coffee or a cup of tea next to me. Or if it's getting closer to the evening, he'll start giving me cold drinks when he's home, which is very sweet. But he'll sneak in,
Yeah,
put it
I do.
down, yeah, and then sneak back out, which is lovely.
My hubby does that. He just slips the drink and some bickies or something by the side of it for
Yeah.
me, but we don't. But I don't stop. I keep on typing. But it's pretty full on. And I think with the Messiah's Bride, I just wrote the Messiah's Bride, which came out in February. That was with Penguin Books, and that
Ooh.
was a book that I spent years on because I had to interview so many people and I had to do so much research.
So
And people
tell us about the Messiah's Bride. That sounds very fascinating.
The Messiah's Bride is a true story. They're all true. It's the story of a little German girl called Stephanie Heinrichs, whose family came out from Munich. They emigrated from Munich in 1990 to find a. They were a very religious Catholic family, devout Catholic family. They were looking for a better way of life, really, a more religious and sort of true way of life where they would be self-sufficient and they would just be away from modern evils and all that sort of stuff in the
Very
country.
Amish.
And he ended up in Australia's most notorious doomsday cult in the bush outside Nowra.
Oh,
So,
wait. I grew up in Nowra. Where was this? Wait,
oh, wow.
tell me about this. Tell me about this because I don't
It
know
was a, it
anything
was
about
at,
it.
it was in the bush. It was in 1990, and they were
Okay,
in the bush.
that was the year I was born, so that's fine.
Okay, well, they were in 1990, and they lived outside Camberwarra in the
Mhm.
bush,
Mhm.
and they were self-sufficient. They were a cult, So they people once they joined, they gave their money up, they gave their homes up, they severed their social networks, their ties, their friendship group, their families, everything they'd ever known,
Yeah.
and they became part of this cult where the cult leader William Cam, aka the Little Pebble, told everyone that he was born to save the world, that God had chosen him to be the new Messiah on earth, and his role was to save the righteous when doomsday struck. And he
Mhm.
was always preaching these doomsday messages, but basically, only the good would inherit the earth, and he would lead them to a new era in paradise, which he was building at his cult in Camberwarra. So, they
My
believed it. In fact,
gosh.
500,000 people around the world believed it.
Oh
And
my
so,
goodness.
people would say, who would believe that? Well, they did, and lots more beside. And they were primed. He used the Bible's teachings to manipulate their beliefs. He absolutely did. But he claimed that the Holy Mother visited the bush once a month on the 13th of every month at 3 p.m. exactly. The Holy Mother slid down on her cloud from heaven in her blue frock, waving to all her followers, but only he could see her and only he could hear her. And he would then, through a microphone, tell everyone what messages she'd brought from the Lord. And the messages got wilder and wilder. And over time, the messages became that he'd been chosen as part of this inheriting the earth after doomsday. He'd been chosen to choose 84 little brides.
Oh,
And these brides would bear him a new race in paradise. And they would immaculately conceive his holy seed and help him populate a new era in paradise. It was all a load of rubbish.
wow.
And Stephanie became one of his brides. And she was told at 13 she'd been chosen by the Lord. The Holy Mother had told him she'd been chosen by the Lord to conceive 27 children in paradise. And he had 84 of them. And her older sister was married to him already. So bigamously married to her older sister Bettina,
Oh
and had
my
already
gosh.
had a mystical marriage. I use the word mystical, another bigamous marriage in Poland with another teenager, and wives all over the place who had his children.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah, so that book was took years because Stephanie had times where she didn't feel like doing it anymore. It was revisiting. Well, she was repeatedly abused for
Yeah.
years and years and years. These little girls thought it was immaculate conception. It was nothing of the like, but they didn't know. They were little girls,
Oh,
They thought it was immaculate conception, but it wasn't. It was just him basically satisfying his appetite for young women, and mostly very young women.
yeah. God, that's so sick. Wow. It, I can't believe I had no idea that that happened just outside of just outside
It
of
did.
Nowra. Oh my
It
gosh.
did. And
I
and I met someone the other day. I was in a cafe with Steph and she was signing books for me. I said, sign the books and then I'll sign the books and we'll put them in bookshops. And this young waitress came over and she said, oh my God, I know who's on the front of that book. And she pointed to William Cam. She said he lived outside Nara. Everybody knew what he was up to. Everybody, but no, it was the talk of the place, but no one would talk. Well, of course they wouldn't because cults are secretive. They
mm,
wouldn't talk. And she said, oh my God. And I said, this young woman here is the little girl on the front cover, and she is the one who brought him undone.
oh
She
my
fled with this child
gosh.
and brought him undone. And she was saying, she was just like, I'm going to tell everybody, everyone I know in Nara.
Oh, I feel like when I was growing up in Nowra, there was still a lot of echoes of that sort of mentality. There was some very culty religious stuff, and it was the most prominent families in the society that were part of it. And yeah, oh, it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense.
Well, he was actually very disliked by the people of Nara because there were a lot of good, true Catholics in that area that really disapproved of what he was up to. And he actually cast a shadow on the true church. He
Mm,
wasn't religious, he was a con man, he was a false prophet. So his sort of bizarre teachings really did a lot of damage to the true Catholic Church, who outlawed him.
mm,
But when I wrote that book, though, that it was an unbelievably, outrageously bizarre story. You couldn't make it up. It was so crazy, and so I wrote that differently to any of the other books I'd written. The other books were hard, confronting, newsy, punchy, terrible stories. This is a terrible story, but it's so out there. So I wrote it like a novel. I thought, people are going to think that didn't really happen. That couldn't have happened. And they say, when did it happen? And when you say it happened, he actually came undone and went to jail in 2005.
oh my
So not
gosh.
all that long ago. And so when you say that, people are shocked that that happened under their noses. So I thought, given that it was so outrageous and bizarre, I would write it as if it were a fiction.
Mm,
And then I'll wham you around the head by saying, I wrote this scene at the start of the book about this marriage made in heaven, this match made in heaven, which turned out to be the marriage from hell. And I've described this honeymoon scene. And then I dropped in somewhere down the story that, his chosen wife standing under the shower on a cold, grey winter morning was 14 years old. And then people go, oh, what? This
yeah,
guy's a pedophile. It sort of
yeah.
drops in the fact that it's real and he's a pedophile.
Oh my goodness. So when is this one getting released? You've this one's released already.
Yes,
Um,
Messiah's Bride. Messiah's Bride was run on 60 Minutes in February.
Beautiful.
Stephanie was interviewed on 60 Minutes, and she actually went back to the cult for the first time in all those years outside the gates of the cult. I mean, that would have been very, very difficult for her to do. So the Messiah's Bride was on 60 Minutes. It was front cover of Woman's Weekly, and it was 8-page feature. It was front cover of Who Weekly, front cover of the UK Daily Mail, front cover
Incredible.
of front cover of Das Bild in Germany, the German newspaper, and it's now been picked up by a German documentary company who want to interview Stephanie and make a documentary about it because it is that crazy and bizarre, and it's true.
Mm, mm. Oh, absolutely phenomenal work. Well done. That is so fascinating. Well, Thank you so much for chatting with me today,
Pleasure.
Megan Norris. It has been an absolute gem, and I can't wait to see you on the mystery panel for the Logan Writers Festival. It's going to be so good to have the real life mysteries and the real life crime alongside the fiction. I think it's just going to add that extra spark to it. So, thank you so much for joining with me
Pleasure.
today, and we will meet up again on the 9th and 10th of June. So, make sure
Okay.
everyone on the other side of the screen has their tickets, and we will see you then. You can get your copy of Megan's books there and ask her all the questions you have about being such an active journalist.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Have a great
Thank you.
day.
And you. Bye.